The blizzard howled like a beast outside, but the frantic knock at my door cut through the chaos. When I opened it, a battered bulldog mother stood there, her fragile puppy trembling in the snow. Her eyes pleaded for help, and I knew this was no random encounter. Why had she chosen my door? What was she running from? That night I faced a choice that would change my life forever, a story of love, sacrifice, and the fight for survival. The blizzard howled through the forest, its icy winds battering against the cabin walls like an unrelenting force. Snow swirled furiously, blanketing the world in white, cutting off all sense of direction. For Elias, a man who had embraced the solitude of this remote wilderness, the storm was merely a reminder of the harshness he had come to accept as normal. But tonight, something beyond nature's fury would test his resolve. A frantic scratching at the door shattered the silence. Elias frowned, his book forgotten on the small wooden table beside him. No one ever came to his cabin, especially not in weather like this. The scratching came again, sharp and insistent, accompanied by a faint whimper. He grabbed his coat and moved cautiously toward the door, his boots creaking against the floorboards. Cracking the door open, a blast of freezing wind and snow struck his face, forcing him to squint. There, huddled against the doorstep, was a bulldog. Her coat, streaked with dirt and blood, clung tightly to her frail frame. Her breath came in sharp, labored gasps. Beside her, half buried in the snow, lay a tiny puppy, a trembling bundle of white and brown fur, no more than 6 weeks old. Elias crouched low, his breath forming misty clouds in the frigid air. "Hey there, girl. What's going on?" he murmured softly. The bulldog, whom Elias would later call Rosie, lifted her head weakly. Her brown eyes, filled with both desperation and determination, met his. She nudged the puppy closer to him with her nose, her movements shaky but deliberate. Elias noticed the faint scars etched into her sides, hints of a cruel past. As he reached out to touch the puppy, Rosie's ears perked up, and she glanced sharply over her shoulder, her body tensing. Elias followed her gaze. A shadow moved in the distance, barely visible through the swirling snow. A man, his silhouette tall and imposing, stood, watching from the edge of the forest. Elias's jaw tightened. His grip on the puppy steadied as he looked back at Rosie. "Is someone after you?" he asked under his breath. Rosie let out a soft whine, her gaze shifting between Elias and the figure in the distance. Then, with one last push, she nudged the puppy completely into his reach and staggered to her feet. Elias rose quickly, his hand outstretched. "Wait!" he called. But before he could grab her, Rosie turned and bolted into the blizzard, her form disappearing almost instantly into the white chaos. Without thinking, Elias made to follow, his boots crunching in the snow as he stepped out onto the porch. "Rosie!" he shouted into the storm, but she was gone. Elias shifted his focus to the shadowy figure. The man had been moving closer, but, upon seeing Elias step outside, abruptly turned and fled into the forest. Elias's eyes narrowed as he watched the figure vanish, his steps deliberate but hurried. Whoever he wasn't there by coincidence. Clutching the puppy, whom he would later name Benji, Elias turned and retreated into the cabin, shutting the door firmly against the storm. He placed the tiny dog near the fire, wrapping him in a thick blanket. Benji's body was cold and weak, his small chest rising and falling with faint, uneven breaths. Elias rubbed his sides gently, willing the warmth to return. "Come on, little guy," he whispered. "You're going to be okay." As Benji slowly began to stir, Elias sat back on his heels, his mind racing. Rosie's scars, her desperation, and the deliberate way she had left her pup with him all pointed to one thing. She was running from something or someone. The man in the woods wasn't just a passerby. Whoever he was, his presence filled Elias with a growing unease, not fear, but a deep sense of purpose. He glanced toward the window, where the storm raged on. Somewhere out there, Rosie was fighting for her life. Elias clenched his fists. The thought of her facing whatever danger awaited her alone was unbearable. But Benji needed him now, and he couldn't abandon the fragile pup. The storm outside was unrelenting, but the storm inside Elias's chest was fiercer. He wasn't a man who ran from conflict. Whoever that shadowy figure was, Elias would be ready. Rosie had chosen his door for a reason, and Elias silently vowed to uncover the truth. For now, though, his focus was on saving the small life trembling before the fire. The questions could wait, but not for long. The morning after the storm, the world outside Elias's cabin was unnervingly quiet. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a pristine white landscape, blanketed in snow so thick it absorbed every sound. The air was still, almost too still, and Elias couldn't shake the feeling that the silence was hiding something. Inside, Elias knelt by the fire, watching over the fragile form of Benji. The puppy had survived the night, but his small body still shivered beneath the thick blankets Elias had wrapped around him. Each shallow breath seemed like a small victory, though it reminded Elias how close the little dog had come to death. "You've got some fight in you, don't you?" Elias murmured, gently stroking Benji's side. "Your mum knew what she was doing when she brought you here." But thoughts of Rosie brought no comfort. The image of her disappearing into the blizzard lingered in his mind, her scarred body, her exhaustion, and the determination in her eyes. She had risked everything to save Benji, and now she was out there, alone and vulnerable. Elias couldn't stand the thought of her suffering. As he moved to the window to survey the clearing outside, something caught his attention. Tracks in the snow. They were fresh, leading from the edge of the woods toward the back of his cabin, and then disappearing back into the forest. Elias's brows knitted together. These tracks weren't Rosie's, they were human. His heart quickened. Whoever had been lurking in the storm last night had returned. He pulled on his heavy coat and boots, securing the door behind him before stepping outside. The snow crunched loudly underfoot as he followed the tracks, which led straight from the trees to the edge of his property. They were deliberate, purposeful. Elias's jaw tightened as he trudged forward, the cold air biting at his face. The tracks led him deeper into the forest, winding through a narrow path between the trees. The further he went, the more uneasy he felt. The prints didn't meander like those of a lost wanderer. They followed a precise trail, suggesting familiarity with the terrain. And then he saw it. A crude trap hidden beneath a thin layer of snow. Elias crouched, brushing the snow away to reveal the iron jaws of the snare. It was large, rusted and cruelly designed. This wasn't a hunting trap meant for animals, it was something far more dangerous. His stomach churned as he noticed dried blood staining the jagged edges. Rosie's blood. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Someone had been hunting Rosie. Someone had chased her through the storm and had come back to find her. Elias stood, scanning the forest with sharp eyes. The trees stood silent, their bare branches swaying gently in the cold breeze. There was no sign of the shadowy figure he had seen the night before, but the lingering presence of the trap was enough to confirm his fears. Rosie's scars, her desperation, her act of leaving Benji behind, all of it made sense now. She had been running for her life, and she had brought her pup to Elias as a last resort. As he retraced his steps to the cabin, Elias's thoughts raced. The man in the woods wasn't just a passerby. He was deliberate, methodical, and dangerous. Rosie had chosen Elias's door for a reason. She had seen something in him, something that told her he could protect Benji. Back at the cabin, Elias closed the door firmly behind him, leaning against it as he exhaled. The fire crackled softly, and Benji let out a faint whimper, stirring beneath the blankets. Elias knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on the puppy's head. "Don't worry, little guy. You're safe here." But keeping Benji safe was only part of the problem. Elias couldn't ignore the nagging questions that tugged at his mind. Why was Rosie being hunted? Who was the man in the woods, and what did he want? And most pressing of all, where was Rosie now? Elias moved to the window, his eyes scanning the snowy landscape. Somewhere out there, Rosie was still running, still fighting. He felt a surge of anger and determination. She had trusted him with her pup, and he wouldn't let her down. Whoever was responsible for her suffering, Elias would find out the truth. The storm had passed, but Elias knew the real danger was just beginning. The cabin was quiet, save for the soft crackling of the fire and the occasional faint whimper from Benji as he slept. Elias sat at the kitchen table, his thoughts racing. The trap he had discovered in the woods lingered in his mind, its cruel design and bloodstains speaking of a deliberate and calculated intent. Whoever had set it wasn't just hunting dogs, they were hunting Rosie. Elias couldn't shake the image of Rosie's scars, her desperation, and the determined way she had pushed Benji into his arms before disappearing into the storm. She had been running from something far more dangerous than the elements. Now, Elias was determined to find out what. The next morning, as the sun rose over the snowy landscape, Elias made his way to town. It was a rare trip for him, but the questions weighing on him left no choice. He stopped by the local veterinarian, Dr. Marianne Carter, whose small clinic served the surrounding area. If anyone knew anything about Rosie, it would be her. Dr. Carter greeted him with a warm smile that quickly faded when Elias described the bulldog. "Scars along her sides, you said?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "And you found a trap in the woods?" Elias nodded. "She came to my door with her pup during the storm, left him with me and ran. I've never seen a dog look so desperate." Dr. Carter sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I think I know who you're talking about. There's been word going around about a dogfighting ring operating in the area. It's cruel and illegal, but they've managed to stay hidden for years. Dogs like her, scarred, exhausted. They're often victims." Elias's stomach churned. "Dogfighting?" Dr. Carter nodded grimly. "And breeding. Female dogs are often forced to have litter after litter. They're treated as commodities, not living beings. If what you're describing is accurate, she was likely being used for both." Elias clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "And the pup, Benji?" "He's lucky to be alive," Dr. Carter said softly. "They don't usually keep the puppies. If he's with you, it's because she fought to save him." The weight of her words settled heavily on Elias. Rosie hadn't just been running. She had been fighting for her life and the life of her last pup. And the man in the woods, the shadowy figure, wasn't just an isolated threat. He was part of something much larger and far more sinister. Dr. Carter continued, "If you found a trap nearby, it's likely they're still looking for her. They don't give up easily. Dogs like her are too valuable to them." Elias felt a surge of anger. The thought of Rosie enduring such cruelty, her body scarred and her spirit nearly broken, filled him with a sense of urgency. He thought of the way she had looked at him, pleading yet determined. She had entrusted Benji to him, and now it was clear why. She had known she wouldn't make it out alive. "I need to find her," Elias said firmly. "She's out there somewhere and she's hurt." Dr. Carter nodded, her expression serious. "Be careful, Elias. These people, they're dangerous. If they're hunting her, they won't think twice about coming after Benji or anyone protecting him." As Elias left the clinic, his resolve hardened. He stopped by the general store, picking up supplies for the search ahead. His mind churned with possibilities. Rosie's dark past explained her fear, her scars, and her sacrifice. But it also meant Benji wasn't safe. Not yet. Back at the cabin, Elias found Benji awake, his tiny tail wagging faintly as he sniffed at the edges of his blanket. Elias knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on the pup's head. "Your mum's tougher than anyone I've ever met," he murmured. "She gave everything to get you here, and I'm not going to let that be for nothing." The fire crackled softly as Elias stared into the flames, his thoughts turning over what he had learned. The man in the woods was no coincidence. He was part of a network that profited from pain and suffering. And Rosie, scarred but unbroken, had stood against them to save her pup. Elias's chest tightened. He had spent years avoiding the world, retreating into the solitude of his cabin. But now, with Benji's small, fragile life in his care and Rosie's fate unknown, he couldn't stay on the sidelines. Whoever these people were, whatever power they thought they held, Elias was determined to expose them. The storm may have passed, but the fight was just beginning. The days after the storm were marked by vigilance and quiet determination. Elias poured his energy into caring for Benji, whose once fragile frame had begun to fill out with warmth and food. But even as the puppy grew stronger, Elias couldn't stop worrying about Rosie. Each morning he scanned the forest's edge for signs of her, but the woods offered no answers. 10 days had passed since Rosie had disappeared into the blizzard. Just as Elias began to fear the worst, Benji's behavior shifted. The puppy, usually content to nap by the fire, became restless, pacing near the door and whining insistently. Thinking he needed to relieve himself, Elias opened the door, but Benji darted outside, his tiny legs moving with determined urgency. "Benji!" Elias called, throwing on his coat and boots as he chased after the pup. The puppy led him deeper into the forest than Elias had ventured in years. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he followed Benji's erratic path, his nose to the ground and tail wagging as if he knew exactly where to go. "What's gotten into you, little guy?" Elias muttered, breath visible in the crisp winter air. After nearly an hour of trudging through the snow, Benji stopped suddenly, his body rigid. Elias followed the puppy's gaze and saw it. A makeshift shelter beneath a fallen tree, barely visible through the thicket. Inside, huddled in a bed of leaves, was Rosie. "Rosie," Elias whispered, his heart aching as he approached cautiously. The bulldog was barely recognizable. Her coat was matted and filthy, her body gaunt, and her injured leg twisted awkwardly beneath her. Her breathing was shallow, but as Elias knelt beside her, her brown eyes opened faintly, locking onto his. There was recognition in her gaze, weak but undeniable. Benji bounded forward, barking softly as he nudged his mother. Rosie's tail gave a feeble wag, her lips curling slightly in what might have been relief. Elias gently placed a hand on her side, feeling the faint rhythm of her heartbeat. "You're okay now," he murmured. "We've got you." But the relief was short-lived. A sharp crunch of snow behind him snapped Elias to attention. He turned sharply, his body tensing. Emerging from the shadows of the trees was the man he had seen during the storm. His face, partially obscured by a hood, carried an expression of cold resolve. In one hand he held a metal rod, its dull surface glinting in the muted light. In the other, a thick leash dangled loosely at his side. The man's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "That dog belongs to me." Elias rose slowly, his body shielding Rosie and Benji. "She doesn't belong to anyone," he said firmly, his voice steady. The man took a step forward, his boots crunching against the snow. "Step aside. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Elias's jaw tightened. "I know enough. She's not going anywhere with you." The man sneered. "You think you can stop me? You don't know what these dogs are worth." Before Elias could respond, Benji let out a sharp, piercing bark, his small body trembling but standing firm in front of Rosie. The sound startled the man, who hesitated mid-step. His eyes flicked to the puppy, then back to Elias, calculating his next move. "I wouldn't take another step if I were you," Elias said, his voice low and dangerous, his eyes locked on the man's, unwavering. The man hesitated, his hand tightening around the metal rod. For a tense moment, the forest was silent except for the distant rustling of branches in the wind. Then, with a growl of frustration, the man took a step back, glaring at Elias. "You're making a mistake," he spat, before turning and disappearing into the trees. Elias exhaled, the tension in his body releasing slightly as he watched the man retreat. But the encounter had left him shaken. Whoever this man was, he wouldn't give up easily, and that meant the danger was far from over. Turning his attention back to Rosie, Elias carefully scooped her into his arms, cradling her injured body as he rose to his feet. "We're going home," he murmured. Benji trotted alongside him, his tail wagging as if he knew they had won a small victory. The trek back to the cabin was long and arduous, but Elias pressed on, determined to get Rosie to safety. When they finally arrived, he laid her gently near the fire, wrapping her in blankets and offering her water. Rosie drank slowly, her strength clearly sapped, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes as Benji curled up beside her, his small body pressed close. Elias sat beside them, his mind replaying the confrontation in the woods. The man's words and actions confirmed his worst fears. Rosie's past wasn't just dark, it was part of something far larger and more dangerous than he'd realized. But now, she wasn't alone. And neither was Benji. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow across the room. For the first time in days, Elias allowed himself to breathe deeply. They were together now, and he would do everything in his power to keep them safe. The fight wasn't over, but at least now they stood a chance. The days after the confrontation in the woods were filled with unease and preparation. Elias had done everything he could to care for Rosie, but the lingering threat of the man hunting her was like a shadow over his cabin. Each new set of tracks or distant rustling in the forest felt like a warning that their time was running out. Rosie, though still weak, showed remarkable resilience. She slowly regained her strength under Elias's care, and her bond with Benji grew even stronger. The pup never left her side, his playful spirit coaxing faint wags from her tail. But Elias knew that unless the danger was dealt with, neither of them would truly be safe. Elias wasn't one to rely on others, but the situation demanded it. He contacted his nearest neighbors, the Carsons, a couple who owned a small farm nearby. Explaining the situation, he described the trafficker and the traps he had found in the woods. "We need to stop this before it gets worse," Elias said, "and I can't do it alone." The Carsons didn't hesitate. "We'll help," Mr. Carson said firmly. "This kind of cruelty has no place here." Mr. Carson called the local police, who agreed to send officers to investigate. Meanwhile, word spread quickly through the community. By evening, several neighbors gathered at Elias's cabin, determined to confront the trafficker. Armed with flashlights, tools, and their own dogs for protection, they were ready to stand up against the threat. The plan was clear. Elias and Mr. Carson would lead the group into the woods, following the fresh tracks near Elias's cabin, while the rest stayed behind to guard Rosie and Benji. The tracks led deeper into the forest, winding toward an abandoned shed hidden among the trees. As they approached, voices became audible through the still winter air. Peering through the trees, Elias saw the trafficker along with two other men. They were inspecting traps, their movements methodical and efficient. Nearby, a makeshift kennel held 3 terrified dogs, their whimpers piercing the cold silence. "This ends now," Elias whispered to Mr. Carson. The police officers, who had arrived quietly, positioned themselves strategically around the clearing. At a signal from Elias, one officer stepped into the open. "Police! Drop everything and step away from the traps!" the officer commanded, his voice authoritative and loud. The traffickers froze, their eyes darting in all directions. One of them lunged towards the kennel, but before he could reach it, Mr. Carson's German shepherd let out a ferocious bark, causing the man to stumble back in fear. "Hands in the air!" another officer ordered, stepping closer with a hand on his holstered weapon. The traffickers hesitated, but the sight of several neighbors and police surrounding them left them no choice. 2 of the men slowly raised their hands, but the trafficker who had pursued Rosie bolted into the woods. Without hesitation, Elias took off after the man, his boots crunching through the snow. The cold air burned his lungs, but he pushed forward, adrenaline driving him. The trafficker stumbled over a fallen branch, giving Elias just enough time to catch up. Grabbing the man's coat, Elias yanked him back, sending them both tumbling into the snow. "You're not getting away," Elias growled, pinning the man to the ground. Moments later, a police officer arrived, securing the trafficker in handcuffs. "You've caused enough pain," Elias muttered, as the officer led the man away. Back at the shed, the police officers freed the captured dogs and began gathering evidence. The traffickers' traps, tools, and documents provided enough proof to dismantle the dogfighting operation. The men were arrested on the spot, taken into custody for their crimes. Elias stood in the clearing, his breath visible in the cold air. For the first time in days, he felt a weight lift from his chest. The traffickers were no longer a threat, and the forest was finally free of their cruelty. Returning to the cabin, Elias found Rosie and Benji waiting near the fire. Rosie's tail wagged faintly when she saw him, and Benji barked excitedly, bounding toward him. Kneeling beside them, Elias gently stroked Rosie's head. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe now." The fight for freedom had brought together a community that Elias had long kept at arm's length. For the first time, he felt not just like a protector, but a part of something larger. Rosie and Benji had found a home, and so had Elias. The fire crackled as night fell, casting warm shadows over the cabin. Though the scars of the past would take time to heal, Elias knew they had taken their first steps toward a brighter future. Chapter 7. A hidden truth unveiled, Su that duok hilo. The crisp winter air had softened with the arrival of early spring, and the once silent forest now hummed with life. Birds chirped from the budding branches, and the snow had melted into patches of soft, damp earth. For the first time in weeks, Elias allowed himself to breathe deeply, free from the weight of constant vigilance. Rosie and Benji had healed remarkably well. Their once weary eyes now sparkled with life, and the bond between mother and pup was stronger than ever. Elias decided they had earned a day of peace, so he took them to the nearby park, a sprawling expanse of open fields and wooded trails. It was the perfect place to stretch their legs and enjoy the fresh air. Benji, now brimming with energy, bounded ahead, his tiny legs carrying him across the grass with reckless enthusiasm. Rosie followed more slowly, her gait still careful but steady. Elias smiled as he watched them, their joy contagious. For once, the world felt simple. As they wandered along a wooded trail, Benji's nose suddenly dipped to the ground. He sniffed furiously, his tail wagging as he veered off the path and into a patch of underbrush. "What have you got there, little guy?" Elias called, moving to follow. Benji emerged a moment later, a worn leather collar clutched triumphantly in his mouth. The old strap was frayed and weathered, its metal buckle tarnished with age. Dangling from it was a small identification tag, partially obscured by dirt. Curious, Elias crouched down and took the collar from Benji. He wiped the tag clean with his sleeve, his breath catching as he read the inscription. "Rosie, if found, please contact J. Whitaker." Beneath it was a phone number. Elias stared at the tag, his mind racing. Rosie had once belonged to someone, a man named J. Whitaker. The idea that she had a life before her harrowing escape both intrigued and unsettled him. Who was J. Whitaker? And how had Rosie ended up in the hands of traffickers? Later that evening, with Rosie and Benji curled up by the fire, Elias dialed the number on the tag. The phone rang several times before a gravelly voice answered. "Hello?" "Hi, my name is Elias," he began cautiously. "I'm calling about a dog. Her name is Rosie. I found her tag, and I think she may have been yours." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When the voice spoke again, it was thick with emotion. "Rosie? She's alive?" Elias's heart ached at the raw hope in the man's voice. "Yes, she's with me now. I'd like to hear her story if you're willing to share." The man, who introduced himself as James Whitaker, invited Elias to visit the next day. Eager to learn more, Elias agreed. James lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town. He was an elderly man, his weathered face etched with both kindness and sorrow. When Elias arrived with Rosie and Benji, James's eyes filled with tears. "Rosie," he whispered, kneeling as the bulldog limped toward him. Her tail wagged cautiously, and she sniffed his hand before leaning into his touch. "She remembers," James said, his voice breaking. "Of course she does." Over tea, James recounted his story. Years ago, he had been in a devastating car accident that claimed the lives of his wife and daughter. Alone and broken, James had spiraled into despair. It was during this dark time that he had found Rosie, or rather, she had found him. Astray at the time, Rosie had appeared at his doorstep, persistent and unyielding in her attempts to comfort him. "She saved me," James said, his voice thick with gratitude. "I didn't think I could go on, but she gave me a reason to get out of bed every morning." For years, Rosie had been his constant companion, her loyalty and gentle nature helping him rebuild his life. But one fateful day, she disappeared. James had searched for her endlessly, but she was gone without a trace. "I always feared the worst," he admitted, his hands trembling. "But it seems she found her way back to doing what she does best, saving lives." Elias listened in quiet awe, the pieces of Rosie's story falling into place. Her selflessness, her instinct to protect. It all made sense now. She had been shaped by her past, her courage forged in both love and loss. Just as she had saved James in his time of need, she had risked everything to save Benji. As they prepared to leave, James placed a gentle hand on Rosie's head. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." Elias couldn't help but smile. "She's a special one, that's for sure." James nodded, his eyes glistening. "Take good care of her. She's been through enough." That evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Elias watched Rosie and Benji curled up together. The old collar lay on the table, a silent testament to the life Rosie had lived and the lives she had changed. Elias felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for Rosie and Benji, but for the reminder that even in the darkest times, the smallest acts of love and kindness could ripple outward in ways unimaginable. "You've done more than most people ever could," Elias murmured, scratching Rosie gently behind the ears. "And now, it's your time to rest." Rosie let out a contented sigh, her eyes closing as Benji snuggled closer. Together they had built a new life, one rooted in resilience, compassion, and the enduring power of love. A year had passed since the snowy night Rosie appeared at Elias's door. The forest, once a place of danger, now felt like a sanctuary for Elias, Rosie, and Benji. The cabin had transformed into a home filled with warmth and purpose, its quiet corners now alive with wagging tails and playful barks. Rosie had fully recovered, her once weakened body now strong and vibrant. Benji had grown into a confident young dog, his playful energy balanced by the quiet wisdom he seemed to inherit from his mother. Together, they had not only survived, but thrived, becoming symbols of hope and resilience. Rosie and Benji's story had spread far beyond the quiet forest. Elias had written about their journey, sharing the harrowing details of Rosie's escape, Benji's survival, and the community's fight to dismantle the dogfighting ring. What began as a local tale of courage quickly gained national attention, inspiring countless people to take action. Animal rescue organizations used their story to promote awareness about the cruelty of illegal trafficking and the transformative power of compassion. Shelters reported an increase in adoptions, with people moved by Rosie's courage and Benji's innocence. Their story became a rallying cry for kindness, proving that even the smallest acts of love could ripple outward, changing lives. Elias was invited to speak at a national animal welfare conference, a gathering of advocates, rescuers, and animal lovers from across the country. Though public speaking wasn't something he had ever imagined himself doing, Elias couldn't refuse the opportunity to share Rosie and Benji's story. Standing on the stage, with Rosie and Benji sitting calmly at his side, Elias felt the weight of their journey. The audience fell silent as he began to speak, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Rosie came to my door on a night when I least expected it," Elias said. "She had nothing left to give but her love for her pup, Benji. In her desperation, she trusted a stranger, trusted me, to protect what she couldn't. That trust changed my life." He paused, looking at Rosie, who gazed back at him with her wise brown eyes. "Rosie taught me what resilience looks like. Benji showed me what hope feels like. Together, they reminded me that love isn't just a feeling, it's an action, a choice we make every day." The room erupted in applause. Many in the audience moved to tears. Rosie and Benji had become more than survivors. They were symbols of what could happen when love and courage intersect. Back home, life settled into a peaceful rhythm. The cabin, once a place of solitude, became a hub of activity. Local children would often visit to see Rosie and Benji, their laughter filling the air as the two dogs played in the yard. Elias began volunteering at the local shelter, using his experience to help other animals in need. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias sat on the porch with Rosie and Benji. The two dogs lay side by side, their breaths in perfect harmony. Elias reflected on how far they had come and the unexpected journey they had taken together. "God works in mysterious ways," he said softly, running a hand over Rosie's head. "That night, you weren't just saving Benji, you were saving me too." Rosie and Benji's story reminds us that love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Their resilience shows that no matter how broken the past may seem, acts of kindness and trust can create a future filled with hope. Rosie's selflessness and Benji's playful spirit teach us that life's greatest challenges often lead to its most profound transformations. To everyone reading this, let Rosie and Benji's story inspire you to open your heart. Whether it's rescuing a stray, helping a neighbor, or simply offering a kind word, every act of love matters. In a world filled with hardship, compassion can be the light that guides us forward. If this story has touched your heart, we invite you to share it with others. Leave a comment below about how animals have impacted your life, or share a moment of kindness that made a difference. Let's keep the spirit of Rosie and Benji alive by spreading love and hope to others. And as always, may God bless you and guide you to see the beauty and grace in every moment. Together, we can make the world a kinder place, one small act at a time.